This is a PIR sensor, a passive infrared sensor, which is commonly used in motion detectors. And I'm going to show you some of the main features of this first. First up on the front, you can see that there is this part that looks like a sensor, but that actually is just a fancy lens that is removable. And once we take that off, we can see the actual sensor in there. On one side of the PIR sensor are two small potentiometers, these two orange pieces here. These control two parameters of the sensor. The one in the middle is sensitivity, so how far away it's picking up the infrared radiation. And then the one next to it is the delay, which will tell you how long it'll remain active after it detects motion. On the side opposite of those two potentiometers are the three pins you use to wire the PIR sensor. And those are labeled underneath the lens. You've got your voltage coming in on the left. The middle will be your output, so the data that it's sending out when it's active or not. And then your ground on the other side. Now I'm going to wire a simple circuit to check if the PIR sensor is working. I'd like to note that I'm using an Arduino only for the power and for grounding purposes. We're not coding anything just yet. Now I'm connecting the PIR sensor to the breadboard and electricity. For my ground wire, I'm using a dark purple wire that comes all the way around to my negative side for my ground. I'm using an orange wire for the hot, which comes around to my positive side on the breadboard. And for the output, I'm using a green wire, and I'm just going to place that into the breadboard here on number 20. Next, I'm going to wire up a LED. I did not bring any resistors home, so I'm just going to place the positive end where my green is coming in, and then I need to hook up the negative side to my ground. Next, we'll connect the power to the Arduino so that power is going through our simple circuit. Now when I place my hand in front of the sensor, you'll see that the light turns on, and once it's in a lower power state, it'll turn back off. As you can see, my delay potentiometer is almost all the way down, and therefore I'm only getting about a second worth of the light lighting up. If I were to turn that potentiometer towards the center position, it's going to increase the delay, and you'll notice that the light will stay on longer once it's triggered. I could also adjust the sensitivity to pick it up at different ranges. Another feature of this sensor is retriggering and non-retriggering, which is based on placing a jumper between any two of these three pins on the side. And there's a yellow piece that goes over them. So if we place the yellow pin from the L position to the center, that is non-retriggering. And if we move that yellow jumper to the H position, that is retriggering. So theoretically how this works is that as long as the sensor is detecting motion, when it's in the H position, it'll keep sending that signal and the light will stay on. With the jumper in the L position though, once it detects motion, it'll send that signal for about a second, and then it'll wait and recalibrate until it detects motion again. So you'll only get about a second of signal in the L position until it resets and captures more motion. Now I'm going to show you how to program an Arduino to use that signal from the PIR sensor. I need to point out that I'm just going to make a very basic circuit that turns on and off an LED, but this time using the code. Of course, you can do more interesting things once you know how to code it than just turning on the LED, but this is just kind of a proof of concept. So I've already got the breadboard and a Arduino here, so I'm going to start by bringing in our 5-volt electricity to our positive side with the red wire. I'm going to bring our ground over to the negative side with the black wire. Let's plop in a PIR sensor, and we'll just throw it on this side and bring in our LED light. Doesn't really matter where. Put it there, and a resistor here. Since we're going to be controlling the LED with the signal from the PIR sensor, let's bring a wire from the anode over here to number 1. Now we need to wire up the PIR sensor. It's important to note that there are 3 pins here, might be different than the ones that you have in the workshop. Actually, these are different than the ones I've been playing with. We've got our ground on the one side, the power in the middle, and then the signal on the other side. So just make sure you check when you're wiring it. Don't just go by whatever you did in Tinkercad. Make sure you're wiring it according to what's marked on the actual sensor that you're using. So this is our ground. We're going to bring a black wire down to our ground side over here. And our power is in the middle, so we're going to bring that down to our red positive side there. And then our signal, we'll wire that over here to number 3. Okay, so we've got our 2 circuits built there, and let's start building the code. Let's start fresh here. We are going to use actually one variable because we're going to store that whatever the signal is coming from the PIR sensor, if it's in a high state that it's detecting motion, or if it's in a low state when it's not detecting motion. So let's set up that integer, and we're just going to call it val, short for value, and we'll make that 0 to begin with initially. Next, let's do our setup. We're using 2 pins. And our first pin mode, number 1, is our output, which is going to the LED. I'm going to make a quick marking there. And we brought our other wire, that's the signal wire from the PIR, over to number 3. And that's all we have to set up for our setup. We're just using those 2 pins. Next, let's build our loop. So the first thing we need to do in our loop is read what's coming from the PIR. Again, if it's getting a signal of motion, a motion signal, that's going to be high. If it's not getting any motion, not reading any motion, it's going to be low. Okay, so and we're going to store that as our val that we had set up as our variable. So since this is going to a digital pin, it's going to be a digital read. And that was in number 3, which is from our PIR sensor. Okay, so now we're storing whatever that's saying as our val. Okay, now we can build some if statements. So if the val is high, and we use a double equals here, and capitals, all caps for high. So if it's reading high that it's detecting motion, we want to turn on the LED. So all we need to do is tell it to digital write to number 1 high. Simple as that. The only other thing we have to do is if it's not detecting motion, so if the value is low, oops, then we're going to digital write to the LED low as well. Close that bracket, and then we just need to close the bracket on the total void loop. So again, 1 is our output, 1 is our output, 1 is our output, 3 is our input, 3 is our input. This code looks good. Let's start the simulation and see if it works. So we've got our PIR. If I click on that, it's going to show a little simulation of being in the motion field, and you can see as I move there, it turns the LED on. If I move out of the field, once the PIR resets, it turns off the LED. So if I move around outside of the field, nothing happens. As soon as I move in, the LED comes on.